Hello, this is Jay Frost speaking to you from the Frontlines of Social Good. That's our weekly news and views program from the Philanthropy Mastermind series. And as we start, as always, we will begin with the top 5 gifts of the week and then look at the headlines shaping the philanthropic landscape. Later in the program, we're joined by Alice Ferris, founding partner of Goalbusters and a national leader in public media fundraising. She'll share what's next for public broadcasting and how stations are adapting their revenue models, donor engagement, and content strategies in a rapidly shifting media environment in the wake of that government news. Then we'll shift from strategy to storytelling with Kimberly Dye, author of Getting to the Yes. In this conversation, Kimberly offers powerful tools for building trust, navigating complex donor conversations, and creating authentic connections that lead to meaningful gifts. Let's get started. This week, the gifts are all under $5 million, or at least most of them appear to be. Nevertheless, it's always an interesting collection, and we start with number 5 in reverse order, as always. Casa Colina Hospital and Centers for Healthcare in Pomona, California, received a $2 million gift from Ellen Tam, honoring her late husband, Wing Tam. The donation supports Padua Village, a residential community program serving adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, enhancing daily care, activities, transportation, and long-term support services. At number 4, Mount Sinai Health System in New York received a $3 million gift from Ruth Lazarus and Michael Feldberg to launch its first pediatric implanted neurostimulation program at the Charles Lazarus Children's Ability Center. Starting September 2025, this initiative will provide implanted neurostimulation therapies for children with cerebral palsy and spinal cord injuries, including surgical placement, rehabilitation, and remote support to significantly enhance mobility and quality of life. Number 3, Atrium Health Foundation secured more than $4 million through 5 grants from the Duke Endowment, marking the largest single investment by that foundation. The funds will enhance rural healthcare access, support workforce development, expand behavioral health services, and bolster child and family well-being programs across North and South Carolina. Number 2, Children's Nebraska was awarded $5.51 million from the James M. Cox Foundation to accelerate its upcoming Behavioral Health and Wellness Center, which is scheduled to open in January 2026. Funds will support innovative mental health services like virtual reality therapy, AI-driven emotional support walls, and expanded inpatient and outpatient care for children and teens dealing with anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and trauma. And number 1 for the week, an undisclosed amount, but described as a transformational gift from the Barrett Family Foundation to St. Joseph's Health Center, Unity Health Toronto, to establish the Barrett Center for Quality Improvement. While the press release, again, does not specify the amount, it is described as transformative and enables BCQI to apply Lean Six Sigma methodologies and invest in frontline-led projects aimed at improving patient care, operational efficiency, equity, family-centered services, and provider well-being across the hospital. This marks one of the most ambitious quality improvement investments in the Canadian community hospital to date. Have we missed a big gift announcement this week? Almost certainly we have. Let us know by contacting me directly through LinkedIn or by email at j@donorsearch.net. Now, here are some of the most important stories shaping the nonprofit and philanthropic sector this week. First, the University of Miami's Ever Brighter campaign for the next century concluded with $2.658 billion, exceeding its $2.5 billion goal by about 6.3%. According to Philanthropy News Digest, the effort included 443 gifts of at least $1 million, nearly 473,000 total gifts, and drew in support from 160,000 donors across all 50 states and 98 countries. The campaign secured $689 million for the endowment, created 112 endowed positions, and added 560,000 square feet of campus space, making the largest private fundraising campaign to date in Florida's history. In kind of an interesting story looking back over the past few years in events, Billboard reports that Black Sabbath's Back to the Beginning benefit concert has become the highest grossing charity concert in history. Held July 5th, 2025, at Villa Park in Birmingham, England, and featuring final performances by Ozzy Osbourne, seated due to his Parkinson's, alongside the original Black Sabbath lineup. The event raised approximately 140 million pounds or 190 million US dollars for Cure Parkinson's, Birmingham Children's Hospital, and Acorns Children's Hospice. Attendance was about 45,000 in person, with an additional 5.8 million live stream viewers, setting a new benchmark, surpassing previous benefit events such as America A Tribute to Heroes and Live Aid and Fire Aid. Trump-era grant cuts have threatened nonprofit stability, according to analysis by the Associated Press and the Chronicle of Philanthropy. They reveal in their study that widespread impact of federal grant freezes and cancellations in January are going to be having an impact across the entire sector. Highlights of that report included references to California's Laguna Beach, the Friendship Shelter, serving 330 unhoused individuals, which raised eyebrows by depending on federal funding for $11.5 million of its $15 million budget. Although, as many of us know, that kind of ratio is not entirely unknown in our sector. In New York's Bronx, over 84% of nonprofits rely on federal grants, and some face potential losses of 30% or more of their budgets, including, in one example, $1.5 million in a cut to the Bronx River Alliance. These reductions are prompting nonprofits to ramp up private fundraising, explore legal remedies, and streamline staff and services amid growing fiscal pressure. Public broadcasting has been slammed by $1.1 billion in funding cuts and a leadership exodus. On June 12th, the House approved the Rescissions Act of 2025 narrowly, followed by Senate passage on July 17th, rescinding $1.1 billion in funding for CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and an additional $8.3 billion in foreign aid. The House vote was 214 to 212, and the Senate 51 to 48. According to Time and Vox, cuts eliminate all federal funding for NPR and PBS beginning on October 1st of this year, hitting smaller and rural member stations hardest, some reliant on CPB grants for up to 50% of their budgets. The Washington Post and Axios report just as of several hours ago that NPR's editor-in-chief, Edith Chapin, will leave by year's end. The reasons cited were a planned step down, in part to, quote, decompress from her dual roles, but timed amid the federal funding crisis. That brings us to our next segment. And joining us now to discuss this environment for public media funding is, of course, Alice Ferris, a pioneer in public funding, or rather public media fundraising, and founding partner of Goalbusters Consulting. With more than 3 decades in hand-on experience, she's helped small and medium-sized nonprofits throughout the country, and especially public broadcasting stations, to build sustainable, community-rooted fundraising programs. Her career began at PBS Wisconsin, where she got her start in hosting pledge drives for the Lawrence Welk Show, a story that never ceases to amaze me. And since then, she's served as development head for KNAU, Arizona Public Radio, Lowell Observatory, and now supports public media outlets like KAWC, KGHR, and so forth and so on. If I were to read her bio, we would never have time to talk. She is a leader in her field, and I'm so grateful that she could take time to talk today. Thank you so much for being here, Alice.
Thank you for the invitation and your persistence, Jay.
One must be persistent. Yes, good things come to those who wait. Well, what I wanted to do is to talk a little bit about this situation with you, and maybe to start by highlighting the video that you just posted. You're active in social media, but this was a different kind of report. Can you talk about what you posted and why it was important for you to do so?
Thank you, Jay. And yes, it was a personal message on LinkedIn and on other social media channels that I'm on. And part of it is related to what you alluded to in my bio, is that public media has been a part of my DNA for most of my professional career. In fact, that start that I got with the Lawrence Welk Show pledge breaks was when I was 16 years old. And so I have been involved in public television and radio pretty much most of my life. And so, really having this rescission package go through of defunding public media, it's not that we haven't fought this before. It has been a conversation we've had many times over my 35-year history with public media. The difference was, in the past, we would always come back to the educational nature of public media. And we would talk about Save Big Bird, which was one of the things I mentioned in my video.
Mhm.
But when we're in an environment where the government is trying to get rid of the Department of Education, it's really difficult for public media to win an argument saying we are being educational programming. And when the rescissions package went through, it felt like it was, as a lot of people in the public media sector have said, it felt like a gut punch. This was not just an attack against public media. It felt like a personal attack for those of us who have been in this sector for a long time. And so I had a lot of thoughts that were circling around in my head. To be completely transparent, the narrative that I ended up recording on that video that I posted, I wrote 90% of that while in the sauna for my monthly I really need to decompress moment. And yeah, it all kind of came to me saying, this is what's in my head, and now I have to share it with the world.
What kind of response have you gotten from that?
It's been really encouraging. I've had a lot of people who've reached out saying, thank you for sharing this. Thank you for being willing to be personal about this. And a couple people, because I do articulate some things of here's what you actually can do, as opposed to feeling really powerless and not being able to do anything. Some people reaching out to me saying, thank you for giving me something to focus on, to be able to take some kind of action.
And I do want to talk about those things. But I do want to also differentiate the people responding, because many people know you for different kinds of work. You don't only work with public media. That's just one big part of your life. But this news, well, I was pointing out in the news right here, it's affecting foreign aid funding with the rescissions, but the budget cuts that occurred right before that in the tax bill were also severe for the entire sector. So what are you hearing from people inside and outside of public broadcasting about not just what you shared in that video, but more generally about the reaction to government cuts?
I think I've heard two different kinds of reactions. One is oh my gosh, the sky is falling. And for a lot of organizations, that's 100% true. It is to your point about some of the news that you mentioned, there are organizations that have been reliant on federal funding for, what did you say, $11.5 million out of a $15 million budget. That's not abnormal for a lot of organizations. And we do work with rural education, we work with healthcare, we work with mental health organizations that are being defunded. We're working with a lot of different nonprofits, mostly small teams, who are thinking, I don't know how I'm going to replace this money. And so there's a little bit of that feeling of desperation and that feeling of I've been abandoned and I don't know how to do this. And for instance, the public radio station that you mentioned that we're working with, KAWC in Yuma, losing this Corporation for Public Broadcasting Community Service grant means on October 1st, 20% of the budget, which was expected to show up on October 1st, is not going to show up. And so right now, that amount roughly is about $200,000. Our community support for that station has been about $200,000. I told the general manager, if I knew how to double your fundraising, I would have done it by now. So I think that's some of the emotions I'm getting from people is what do I do next? I have no idea. And then I think there's another group of people who are reacting with, this is a wake-up call. This is we need to completely reinvent how we do what we do, how we deliver the services that we deliver, because our services are still important. So how do we think about this differently? And obviously that's not a black and white spectrum. It is a spectrum. It is the people are all along that range. And sometimes depending on the hour, we'll switch where they are in that range of emotions.
When you're talking about that, do you mean the tactics we use, Or are you talking also about the case for support itself? Because as you just said before, in a time when people said, save Big Bird, now they're cutting Department of Education, but also, which you said in the video, which I thought was so meaningful, Big Bird is over there on Netflix. So maybe people aren't understanding the value because sometimes the media market has become so disaggregated. So is there a new case for support that you're finding that public media needs to make?
I would say yes. And some of the things that we've been talking about over the last many years actually is about how do these stations provide local service? Because I think it really came to a head during the pandemic, where people were changing their media consumption habits, particularly, for example, with public radio. I mean, where do people typically listen to the radio? Pre-pandemic, they listen to it in their cars. And so they're commuting to work, they're listening to the radio, and that's when they're consuming public radio. Public television was already going down that path because people were time shifting their media consumption. So they weren't necessarily doing what people did when Jay, you and I were kids, which was you sat down in front of a box at a prescribed time and you watched a show, right? When I was first starting in public media, the Ken Burns' The Civil War was the big mind-blowing series. And everyone watched it at the same time because that's the only way you could consume media, right? And so what we have now is that people consume media when people consume media. And all of that shifted for television earlier than it started shifting for radio. But with the pandemic, it shifted with radio too. So when we've been talking since the pandemic about how we deliver the programs that we deliver, we've had to think differently about what is public media anymore. It's really about the educational and journalistic content and the cultural content. It's not necessarily about the box or the other box that has just audio in it.
Right, right. Well, so if the content itself is unique, and that seems to be what you're saying, and I certainly feel that's true, then how do we bring that message to not just Washington, but to the people who are giving 200,000 right now in Yuma when you really need 400,000? I mean, or are we talking about stations either closing or consolidating efforts and putting up, wider broadcast towers? What are the ways that people are going to be able to fight this right now? Because there's a budget deadline. I mean, they're going to start running out of money in October. And then what are some of the longer term ways that we can respond in terms of revenue?
Mm-hmm. So this is something that we are still figuring out. I think ultimately, yes, there will be stations that have to shutter. There is no question to me that there will be some stations across this country that will have to shut down. And for some people, that'll be for their community a huge loss, because very often what we will see and what has been talked about as we've tried to battle this rescission is that it's really the small, rural, and minority service stations who will be impacted the most. Because what you cited in your news update about 50% of the budget being from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting for a lot of these stations, I would argue that for some of the stations we've worked with, particularly Native American and Indigenous population serving stations, it's much higher than that, where you're looking at as high as 85% of their budget coming from CPB funding. And just to give you a quick story, one of our friends in the Native public media sector, Peter Tuluk, was the general manager of a station in rural Alaska. And it is the lifeline. And when people say, oh, wait, you don't need public media for emergency service because everyone has a cell phone, I would take that person who just raised that complaint and said, we don't need public media because I have a cell phone, and plunk them in Peter's community. And I dare you to try to get a cell phone signal, because the way that they communicate in those communities is over the radio. It's so much so that when Peter he told this story about he was up at his fish camp and he couldn't be reached. And so the radio station needed him, and they went on the radio and said, hey, Peter, can you go to the ranger station and pick up the phone? And Peter was very proud of this.
I know that there's been a movement, not just in the United States, but around the world, of people moving to urban centers. And maybe as people do that, they forget, or maybe they had never learned what it's like in these other areas.
Mm-hmm.
But it surprises me that people, when they're discussing these issues at a political level, wouldn't know that, since they represent these populations. They represent these geographical areas which don't have the cell phone signal, or they need not just the emergency broadcast system, which is true, but they also would want local news, which they're not going to have
Mm-hmm.
because there's no local paper, and that's the only way to know what's going on.
Exactly.
So as you're having these conversations, then is part of the strategy for addressing the revenue crisis to also kind of rebuild maybe some of these conversations with people who are in a position to lobby more effectively on behalf of these public broadcasters?
Well, I think to your point about local service, I think the stations that will survive this are the ones that are going to double down on local service. So yes, public radio, public television provides national programming. And that national programming is very important because each individual station does not have the capacity, either financially or with personnel, to be able to produce some of these sweeping documentaries and large scale series, whether on TV or radio. I mean, Ken Burns has his series coming out in the fall, The American Revolution. A single station does not have the ability to do that. A single station doesn't have the ability to pay for Ken Burns, but the network as a whole has the ability to do that. So I don't want to dismiss the power of the national programming that we have available on PBS and on NPR. But the thing that distinguishes the local station is their ability to represent and communicate the voice of their local community. A reporter in Yuma, Arizona, who's reporting on education solutions, Cisco Stargazer, our reporter, has a very unique approach to the voices of Yuma, Arizona, which is, 15 minutes from Mexico. And other people who are in other stations. I mean, we work with South Carolina ETV and public radio. It's a statewide network. There are voices that are unique to South Carolina that can't be expressed by someone in Washington, D.C., or even in Yuma, Arizona. So we really need to give these stations that platform to be able to communicate that local story. Because I think one of the threats to our culture as a whole is that if we don't have these windows into these communities that we don't have personal experience with, we will continue to be more and more siloed. And we will continue to be more and more fractured. And we will continue to not understand the person that we are trying to both be Americans with. And I think that's what we have seen in the halls of government. That's what we have seen in Congress, is that people have stopped listening, and they are like in their little echo chamber, and they don't want to be exposed to some of these other communities, like people who don't have cell phone coverage. So I think part of the call at this point is to listen to one another and to share each other's stories and to try to connect on that human level, so that we don't continue to be fractured, so we don't continue to not listen to what other people have to say. And that's part of the power of public media, is that storytelling and that sharing of culture that I hope we don't lose as we go through this funding crisis.
When you talk with a client or just other organizations out there in the country that come to you and they say, we're going to lose that $200,000, where we're going to come up with the rest, I know you don't have an answer today for that. You're working through it, and it's probably very individualized, right? So what's happening in Yuma is not the same thing that's happening in South Carolina. But what is it? What are the 2 or 3 things that you start them with, that you get them to stop thinking about what just happened to them and start thinking about what is possible?
I think right now, the first thing I'm telling people is, and it's not just public media, it's other entities that are losing major funding. Give yourself a moment to grieve. because I think we quickly fall into the, okay, got to go solve this problem. And we don't give ourselves just a moment to say, this is a terrible thing for us. And we want to have that moment to say, I'm going to acknowledge the fact that this is not great. But then the analogy I've been using actually since spring, so before this all started to come to a head, is the idea of, if you were given a scary health diagnosis as just an individual, and you were sitting there thinking, I don't know what to do next, what would probably happen is that you would tell your inner circle. You would talk to your family, you would talk to your closest friends. And it may be I have this scary diagnosis, I don't know what's next. We're taking steps to work on a treatment plan, but I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know how this is going to end up. That's what I'm encouraging organizations to think about now, is that you have an inner circle of supporters. They may be your major donors. They may be your longest term donors. They may be just people that you know are incredibly supportive of your cause. And reach out to them. Tell them, hey, look, this is a scary time. And we don't know what's next. We don't know how to solve this problem. And we're not even ready to ask for your help yet, because we don't know what we need. But I want you to know that we're working on it. And we want you to know that we want to count on your support when the time comes. And so I'm asking people to be maybe a little bit more vulnerable than they would have been normally, and say, just communicate with your inner circle and say, yeah, this is hard, but we know that we're going to be moving forward together.
You've told a story to me before when we did an episode of the podcast some time ago about, and I know you told this story to other people as well, but I don't think we've heard it here in this context, about how you were really introduced to public media so many years ago, about Mr. Rogers, right?
Yes.
Would you mind sharing that? Because that's, Mr. Rogers, like Big Bird, makes the rounds whenever we worry about not having our stations. But I think he is a particular presence, especially in this kind of environment where there are so many people kind of at odds with one another. So talk about that and what that means to you.
Well, so what you're referring to, Jay, is a picture that has been hanging in my office for as long as I've worked in public media. Well, as long as I've worked in public media and they let me have an office. And it is a picture of me and my mom and Mr. Rogers when I'm probably about 18 months old, maybe a little older. And my parents and I were on vacation, and my dad tells it this way, that his wife is holding me, his child, his only child at the time, and all of a sudden she starts running down the terminal at LaGuardia Airport. And he's like, where is she taking off with my child? I should follow her. And he catches up to her finally, and she is standing there talking to this man. And it takes my dad a moment to realize, that's Mr. Rogers from TV. And of course, my dad is a very good Asian tourist, and he has a camera around his neck. And he immediately pulls it out and starts taking pictures. And so there are two pictures of me when I am 18 months old with my mom and Mr. Rogers that have shaped my entire history since then. And the thing that has always been important to me about that connection with Mr. Rogers is one of the quotes that he says, and that surfaced during 9/11 and has surfaced during major crises throughout the decades since he said it, was when you are scared, find the helpers. And so it's look for the people who are helping, because they will help you too. And so I just remind myself on a regular basis that I just need to be a helper, and I need to look for other people who are being helpers too.
Well, we certainly have a helper with you. Alice Ferris, thank you so much for this. Alice, if people want to follow more of your work, what's the best way to do that?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Alice Ferris, or you can visit our website at goalbusters.net.
Thank you so much, Alice. Really great to see you.
Jay.
Appreciate it. Well, It's hard to follow up on that, but we will try. We're going to turn our attention now to um, relationships that form the basis of maybe some of the larger asks that we need to do, whether it's in public broadcasting or wherever we find ourselves in need to um, build those partnerships that can really be transformational. And to do that, we've had a conversation with Kimberly Dye, a seasoned nonprofit executive, campaign strategist, and leadership coach with more than 2 decades of experience in guiding organizations through transformational moments. She's led major capital endowment efforts in institutions including Gulf Shore Playhouse, David Lawrence Centers, and WGCU Public Media. We do have a through line today, and has raised tens of millions of dollars to advance the arts, mental health, education, and environmental causes. She's also the founder of Getting to the Yes, a new platform and a series of books to help fundraisers and mission-driven leaders move past hesitation, communicate with clarity, and of course, to make the ask with confidence and integrity. We talk about that book right here, right now. Kimberly, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate having an opportunity to talk to you about your new book, or really book series.
That's great. Thank you, Jay. I was thrilled to hear from you as well and appreciate the opportunity to talk about getting to the yes.
And let's start with where you are. You are just telling me you're on the road. So where are you today?
So we're on vacation, family vacation this summer. My daughter had a martial arts competition in Fort Worth, Texas, a whole 90-minute competition. So we came from Florida and decided to make it a 9-day trip. So you're getting me kind of casual. I'm in Texas Hill Country, about to go hop on the back of a horse, hoping I can get that horse to the yes as well, and we have a good trip.
Well, we can have that as an after interview after you take your ride. Hopefully the horse is cooperating. So now you're on the road right now for, I guess, for fun and for family. Where are you usually finding yourself? What kind of work are you doing?
So I work out of Naples, Florida, and I work for the largest behavioral health care provider in our county, which is actually the size of the state of Rhode Island. So we're talking about mental health and substance use care. We are in a $160 million public-private partnership initiative. Our county's in the worst mental health crisis that it's ever seen. And, you know, my daughter is 10. And if you will believe this, the #2 cause of death in children my daughter's age is death by suicide, Jay. So we're in a massive campaign to raise a lot of money to build new buildings, renovate others. We are in a workforce crisis as well. So we're raising some funds to be able to recruit and retain individuals, because all the buildings don't matter if you can't fund the people in the programs. And that is truly, I think it'll be my swan song of my formal career, my real purpose-filled project for the community.
And I'm sure that does dovetail with what we're going to be talking about in terms of your book itself, because um, talking with people about those issues, even though they are urgent and critically important, must be fraught. I mean, people bring a lot of ideas to the discussion about behavioral health, and not all of them are necessarily conducive to a really productive, healthy conversation about what we can do together to make things better. Um, Let me ask you, when you were starting to think about this book, and I understand it's a series of books that's going to be coming out, so we'll talk about that, getting to the yes, what was it that was preventing people from getting to the yes, and maybe even draw that context to the kind of work that you're doing today? What's the major barrier that we have in getting people to say, yes, I'll support that too?
You know, I think it's that, you know, when everything's going well and donors are on board and the economy is great and there aren't political shifts in play, or I will tell you, when I say it's a passion project, or a purpose project rather, I've had a lot of passion projects that were easy yeses. Mental health comes with a stigma. People don't want to talk about it. They don't want to address it, right? So there's some sort of barrier there. And we often say that it's about, maybe it's not me that's making the ask, right? Maybe it needs to be somebody else. Maybe it's not the right time. Maybe it's not the right mission. Maybe it's not the right amount. But I think what happens and what I see in fundraisers is everybody knows how to make the ask. They know how to use a CRM. They know how to write the great direct mail piece. Some can think on their feet, some can't. But it seems like when someone says no, there's that breakdown, that barrier. There's that retreat. right? Folks want to walk away and say, okay, I'll come back later and revisit this. And I think that's when the magic happens. I often say, and I think it drives my staff nuts, I love to get a no, whether it's from my child, whether it's from my husband, whether it's on the job, because that's the challenge, to go and try to overcome that and the joy that's reached. And I will say some of the most transformational gifts that I've ever been able to secure for an organization or a mission have come out of a no, that we've been able to then turn it around and get to the other side. And I think that's what makes this book series stand out, because it's not just your traditional, I'm a fundraiser and here's all the techniques that you have to go through to put together a capital campaign or to write a direct mail piece. It really then focuses on when you've done all that and then you get a no, or God forbid, several no's in a row, how you turn that around. There'll be a book in the series about overcoming fear and regaining that confidence, because it's really hard to hear no and to hear multiple no's and still get up in the morning and realize you are doing a good job and your mission does matter, and you've just got to find that right fit for individuals.
When you were talking about that, it made me think that some people may hear getting beyond the no and thinking about persuasion. But are you really talking about persuasion, or are you talking about finding kind of a different path for the donor as well as for the institution to getting to a kind of a better yes than maybe the original request?
I think sometimes too, it's the yes that we didn't know we really wanted, right? Even
Mm.
I have multiple sclerosis. I've battled cancer twice, right? A lot of that getting to the yes is from that attitude. And I remember when I was first diagnosed with MS, and people said, "Well, aren't you scared? Aren't you worried?" And I said, "No, because now at least I know what it is, so I know how to tackle it. I know how to get to the other side of it." And in a way, that was a yes for me. That was a yes that I never would have wanted or wished for myself, but it changed my life. So I think what we do has a little bit of persuasion involved when you have the person who doesn't know, how to get to that philanthropic moment in their life. But this is really about helping that donor find what works for them on the path through your mission. I have a great story. I had a donor here in Naples, and he was a firm no. And I probably would have to use a bit of the vernacular to tell you what he said when he said no, oh heck no. And it was a seven-figure request, $1 million request. And we talked through what would really work for him. And it was a much lower gift amount. It was a $50,000 gift. And he was doing it because his wife was very involved with our organization, kind of as a token gift. And very long story short, at the end of our year-long journey together, he actually ended up giving 1.5 million. And I realized it was never about the dollar amount. It was never about the mission for the organization. For this particular donor, it was for a very specific thing within the organization that wasn't available at the time. And we had to wait and watch for that to happen, and then to be able to go back and present it to him. And he always had said to me, he has passed now, that he always had said, "This was the greatest gift of my life. And I've given more money, Kim, than I gave to your organization. But it was the most meaningful gift because you found the thing that matched me." To me, that's the getting to the yes. And the organization won as well. It was a much larger gift than we had asked for to begin with.
And I do want to dive into the book, because as much as you can take us through a book in a short interview, but why a book? Let's start there. You told me something before we went live about the nature of all these books, and I have a bunch of them behind me. A lot of great books in our field, a lot of great books about philanthropy and social good, but they're often heavy. My wife jokes that I'm about to take a trip to England and I can't carry all those books with me. I better use a Kindle. But there may be more to it than just the number of pages. Why a book, and why this book now?
So I've always been a writer, and in my career, I knew that there were a lot of stories to tell. And I will tease you here to say that getting to the yes, the series we're talking about for fundraisers,
Mhm.
there's a whole other slew of books as well, from grandparents raising grandchildren to difficult relationships with couples. Because I don't know, I often joke, and in the beginning of book one, I don't play the piano, I don't play a sport, I don't have a lot of talents. Somehow in my life, I've had that attitude shift that's allowed me to get to the yes. So the written form to me, I think, works really well. The difference is that I think your wife could maybe pack the whole series on the trip, because these books are meant to be meaty in content, not necessarily in size. So 100 pages or so less in a book, but it's the type of thing like when you go to a conference and you leave the conference, I don't know how you are, but I come home and I'm on fire, right? I have all these ideas. I take really practical things from a conference or those types of meetings. And I really wanted the book series to be just that, Jay, so that somebody could flip to chapter 10. They could be in a situation that they're facing. They could read some words of experience and wisdom from myself and from others, and then be able to go and try those tactics and deploy those techniques.
So now we know why, and we also know you're writers. It's a special passion to be able to take what you know and put it into a book. But then you have to organize that thinking, and in this case, not just the thinking in one book, but I guess again you're talking about a series of 12. So can you take us kind of on a brief guided tour of what's in this book, and then maybe introduce us to how this fits with the rest of the series that's coming?
So this is the overarching book. So if folks don't want to buy any in the other series, they can start with this book and pretty much get the entire overview of fundraising and how it fits with getting to the yes. So from overcoming the fear to bouncing back after you've received a no, to those mind shifts and those strategy shifts, whether you're in a big campaign. There's a section related to mid-level giving. There's a section related to major donors and how to respond to those. And even some of the internal yeses that you need to receive. Oftentimes we have to get to that point with our CEOs, with our board members. There's some short stories in there, brief tidbits from my career to kind of set the stage. But a great example is when I had a board member say to me, well, Kim, what am I paying you for if you want me to help you fundraise? And, wow, that was an ouch moment. I think I refer to it like that in the book, to hear somebody say that. And I either at that moment, and it was said in front of my entire staff, right? So I either in that moment could have retreated, or I could have leaned in to that conversation. I told him if he would just go on the ride with me a bit, that I would help him see why it was so critical for him to be involved. And there were so many yeses out of that one statement that this board member made in the long run, because he became one of our biggest fundraisers. I don't often like board members to do the ask, but he became very, very good at it. He opened the doors for us. He built relationships for us. I saw the light bulb come on the day that he got it. And then what was magical is he became our board chair, and he then inspired all the other board members to follow suit, and often would tell the story about the first time that I ever suggested that he tried to do a peer relationship type of situation. So I bet if I had a tally sheet or a scorecard, I could have checked off so many yeses that came from that. These are the type of experiences that are in the book, because I'm betting others, whether they're an entry-level fundraiser, whether they're someone more senior or seasoned, have run into similar situations. It might just give them a different way to look at something or think about something.
Absolutely, and you talked about the different parts of the operation, and now you're touching on the different partners we have in doing this work. And you said that you don't often like the board members to do the ask. Could you talk a little bit more about that for those who are just again thinking about, well, how can this apply to me? This is a huge point for them. For many, there's this challenge with getting board members to do what they want, which maybe is the wrong tactic, but why is it that you found that not to always be the best role for them to be the solicitor?
Well, it is such an important topic, and there will be a book in the series just on that, right, on board development. So not everybody likes to ask for things, and whether that's a gift, time, treasure, talent, whether it's to actually get my husband, who would never ride a horse, onto a horse with me here in Texas. We got to that, yes. Folks don't always like to make the ask. And what I realized in fundraising is you have to be good at it to make the donor comfortable, to get to the result that you're all looking for. And if you take somebody into that situation and they're not really comfortable with it, it's just not going to work. I often lean into board members to build those relationships. So they're often on the call with me. They might be sitting right next to me. They tell the story. They talk about the mission. They talk about why they're involved with the organization. And then we have a subtle shift to the person whose skill is to get that donor to the next stage in the yes process. It's not always even just board members, it can be CEOs. I'm blessed right now to have a CEO that is the consummate fundraiser because he is that relationship builder and just that kind of person that everybody wants to be in the room with. I had a past CEO who probably would sit here and tell you this. He was an engineer by trade. He never wanted to make an ask. In fact, he would crawl out of his suit coat if we were in a meeting in that situation. But if he had to talk about the logistics of the organization, he was on point. So oftentimes it's that the duo that goes out. But here's the thing. Most people don't want to talk to fundraisers, at least not from hello. They run the other way often because they know that we're coming to seek something. So leaning into those board member relationships to open the door, to get you the meeting, perhaps to be in the meeting with you, to put on an event in their home, where they can bring all of their friends in. That to me is the vital role of what a board member is. And then if you're just lucky enough that one of them is a pretty good development person themselves, then if they want to make the ask, I wouldn't turn that down necessarily either.
Okay, so there is a role. The question is, what's the best role, I guess, and that's always a challenge to figure that out. And I'm sure that this thinking through this and reading through this will help in figuring that out on an individual basis. That also brings up another question, and I didn't preview this with you, but I'm curious your thoughts on how important it is for us to get beyond no personally in order to be good at this work. Because whether it's being donors ourselves before we're asking others to support the organizations, or whether it's just, like you say, getting over some of these fears, whether it's getting ourselves to get on the horse before we ask our husband. There are a lot of impediments that we have in our own thinking to doing new things. How important is it, and maybe you touch on this in the book, how important is it to get beyond those kind of those reticences, those fears, those barriers before we ask others?
Well, we have to have skin in the game, and I'm glad you brought that up because you know, on my LinkedIn profile, I remember the day that I started off saying I was a philanthropist, right? And I used to think, well, I'm not a philanthropist because I only give, I don't know, $250 a year to my organization. Yet I would say to donors, it's really not about the amount, right? It's about that action. So as development professionals, advancement professionals, we have to have that skin in the game. I think that starts by giving. I think that too, to get over the no or to get over that reticence, you have to have mission alignment. So I've never worked for an organization that I didn't truly believe in. It's real hard to go ask somebody to get on board and support the organization if you don't believe in it or support it yourself with your own time, treasure, and talent, because that's where the magic happens. That's where the donor really believes and buys in. But I will tell you that most often when I have a new fundraiser start and they're on a roll and they're getting a bunch of yeses and everyone's applauding them, I often say, I'm applauding you too. I'm going to applaud you more when you get your first no. And they'll look at me and say, but I thought you always want me to get yeses. And I say to them, I want you to get the no so we can work on how to make you come out of that, because that's what's going to make you the better professional, the stronger human being, to get over that reticence and to come back stronger. And once they do that, once they get that no, they come out on the other side. That's truly, I think, Jay, where the magic happens, because they know what they can do to be that stronger person. This isn't for everyone. What we do for a living is not for every person. From the stress, the burnout, the turnover in the profession, and even within the donor population, it really takes a strong person. I'm finishing my dissertation, if you can believe, on top of the book writing, and it is about fundraiser turnover and burnout and building this culture of philanthropy. If you can believe, I have yet to find, and maybe one of our viewers can tell me if I'm wrong, but I've yet to find a published study that has brought together fundraisers with board members and with CEOs together to talk about fundraiser turnover and burnout. And even, I think more importantly, if we're all aligned on what the role of a fundraiser is, because that's that internal yes. When I'm hired or I build a team and we're paying $100,000 to a fundraiser, I can almost guarantee you there's somebody on the board 6 months in saying, well, how come they haven't brought in any money? How come they haven't gotten the $1 million gift? I see that misalignment all the time. And I really think it's what leads to that turnover and that burnout with our colleagues. Then you throw some no's into the mix, right? So you're already feeling challenged. You're already worried that you're not getting transactionally enough money in that pipeline, and somebody gives you a no. And I look back to the young Kim before all these circles set in, and I would have loved back then for somebody to say, don't run away when you get the no, because that is when the magic happens. That's where the donor's really going to believe that this isn't a transaction, that you're in it to help them find where they're supposed to be. Maybe that's with your organization, maybe it's not, but you're going to help have that intention in place, right? That thoughtfulness in place. So let's get through the hump and the no, and let's figure out how we can get the person to ride along with us. All
I
these.
almost wonder if you thought about calling this getting to know, because no seems to be so important in getting to yes. But I guess that can seem like a downer if you don't really understand what you're trying to share here.
You know, I had a donor once, and I can speak about her because this is a very public story. She's passed as well. Myra Janko Daniels here in Naples, Florida. She built the Naples Philharmonic. Her husband was the force behind Mad Men. They both were ad execs out of Chicago. And when I first moved to Florida, I was seeking a mentor, not necessarily a philanthropist. And someone had recommended Myra, and I went to lunch with her. And after she got over the fact I wasn't there to ask her for money, she became a mentor. And she sat down with me, Jay, and she told me, I worked for a public media station at the time, and she gave me notes about all the things we were doing wrong or things we weren't doing at all. And it was 10 single-spaced typewritten pages of notes when I printed it out.
Wow.
And she was giving $250 annually to the organization at that point. And she and I began a beautiful journey. We traveled together. She mentored me personally and professionally. And before she passed, she ended up giving her largest gift in her lifetime to our organization, but only because I took those 10 pages to the meeting. They had tear stains on them. They had coffee stains, maybe a little bit of a wine cup ring there, wine glass ring. And every single thing on that list was either fixed or added or handled. And I was able to hand her the list. And she said, I can't believe you kept this 4 years on this journey together. And I said, I had to show you that we heard you, that we took what you said seriously, so that you can consider making this investment. And so you can say yes today. She said yes so fast that I couldn't get back to my office to inform our university president that I had even made an ask of the donor and that she had said yes. And she picked up the phone and called him before I could. And I will tell you that later on, she and I sat down and she said, you know, Red, you need to write a book. And I said, Myra, I got a whole bunch of books in me. And she said, then I hope that you do it someday, because you got me from 10 pages of you'll never get this right, kid, to a yes over a burger at Shula's Steakhouse. So I think she was part of the inspiration for the series, and I do pay some tribute to her in the first book.
That's a beautiful, beautiful story. Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing about this book, and as well as the books to come. If people want to grab a copy, how can they do that, Kim?
So they are, the first book is able to be pre-ordered on Kindle only now. And the first in the series drops in paperback on September 3rd.
And then the others are coming out in a quick sequence, or what?
I'm hopeful. You know, I think about once a month if all stays on track.
And if people want to just learn more about your work and follow that, how can they do that?
Sure. Gettingtotheyes.org. You can check it all out there, and there is a link to the pre-order for the Kindle as well.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And my thanks again to both of our guests today. But I do want to let you know what's coming up in the series, so don't go away quite yet. On Thursday, July 24th, join us for a new episode of How to Raise, our CFRE accredited series. In Beyond Survival Mode, 5 strategies for fundraisers in today's uncertain times. That's the name of the session. We'll sit down with Sharon Papo, CEO of Indigo Skies Consulting. She'll be our trainer that day. She'll offer timely, practical insights for navigating the economic and social turbulence of 2025. And we know there's a lot of it. And share strategies to strengthen donor relationships, build key competencies, and stay grounded and effective over the long haul. She's a wonderful presenter, a wonderful person, and I'm sure you'll enjoy that. Then on Friday, this Friday, we drop the newest episode of the PM podcast. This time it's with a legendary figure in fundraising, Kay Sprinkle Grace. It's a wonderful conversation that really delves into the personal, as the series typically does. In this case, a book that she has written that you haven't yet seen. And I'm sure you'll enjoy hearing that conversation. That'll be available for you wherever you'd like to listen, or you can grab it over there on, of course, the DonorSearch YouTube channel or on the DonorSearch website as soon as it drops. And then on Tuesday, July 29th, we're going to have our next Frontlines of Social Good show, but it will be at 2 p.m. Eastern rather than 1 p.m. because I will be in Oxford holding our series live from Oxford over the next 4 weeks. And so we'll be doing it at a slightly different time. Again, that's 2 p.m. Eastern. And this time we'll be welcoming Clayton Weimers, Executive Director of Reporters Without Borders, USA. It'll be a wide-ranging discussion concerning, of course, press freedom and how donors can support human rights and independent journalism in time of global instability, among other topics. To register for any of our live sessions, visit the website of our very generous sponsor, DonorSearch, the leader in responsible AI and donor research solutions for the nonprofit fundraising world at DonorSearch.net. Thanks for spending time with us. We'll see you once again next Tuesday at 2 p.m. on the Frontlines of Social Good. So long for now. Take care.